O frail city, where strangers arrive. Hello, I'm SB Moores, and today I want to talk about my final thoughts and have a little bit of a discussion and maybe a little bit of analysis of Toll the Hounds, the eighth book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. I have just finished reading it for the very first time about 2 weeks ago at this point, so I think that my thoughts are properly. I don't think I'll have any more recency bias at this point, but maybe my hype for this book went up in that time. Who knows? In anticipation for Dust of Dreams and the Crippled God. But that waits to be found out for the video. But having finally finished it, I'm very happy that I decided to read this. I was originally going to read Return of the Crimson Guard after Reaper's Gale, and I am sure that Return of the Crimson Guard is also a fantastic book. But I'm so happy that I read this. This was just an amazing experience, this book. Truly phenomenal. Um, and just like maybe I'm a little too easy to please, or maybe Malazan really is just that good, but just like every other book in this series, 10 out of 10 for me. But without further ado, this will be spoilers for all the way up till the very last line of Toll the Hounds and everything before that. No Novels of the Malazan Empire spoilers, or Carcanus, or Witness, obviously, or any other series. Even the Botchlane and Corporal Broach novels, I won't spoil those. But I might not talk as much about stuff that happens in the first half of this, considering I already made a 40-minute video on my thoughts up until that point. Although if something changed closer towards the end of the book that was revealed or happened in the beginning of the book, then I will obviously talk about it then. But some certain aspects of the first half I probably won't talk about as much up until the end of Cold Eyed Virtues. But without further ado, Toll the Hounds is probably the most different of all of the Malazan books. And I mean that in several ways. I think that probably the most easy difference you can make is the difference in the narration. Whereas most of Malazan has a disembodied narrator that when it takes a POV, it sort of speckles in their own flavor to the prose, usually, to describe stuff maybe how they would describe it, but still not being them describing it themselves. Whereas with Toll the Hounds, we have a very clearly defined narrator, a character, and one that is in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and specifically in this book, being Krupe. I know most people say Krupp, but when I first read Gardens of the Moon, I said Kruppe in my mind. I guess I had just never seen the name before, and I just can't shake the habit at this point. It's been so long. I shook Malazan to Malazan, I think, but I don't think I can ever shake off Kruppe. But we'll see. Maybe I'll start pronouncing it Krupp one of these days, or Kruppe. But Krupe being the narrator, I must say it was one of the most enjoyable parts about this book, and I think it was a great decision to make him the narrator. And there are several reasons for that. In terms of thinking about who else could have narrated this book, what options do we have? Iskaral Pust? I don't know if we would have liked that book quite as much as this one, but Krupe himself has so much personality and such unique idiosyncrasies and is such a unique and interesting character that his way of telling this tale of the Malazan Book of the Fallen has just been very, I think, it enhanced the reading experience for this kind of story very well because of the way that Krupe has humor, and he also is able to wrestle with the tragedies that happen in this book. Especially, it's interesting because these are tragedies that are very close to him, such as with Murillo or with Cutter. Or I think it's safe to say that everybody was mourning the death of a spoiler warning. I mean, I already said that, but mourning the death of Animander Rake, which was one of the worst in this book. As in, like, it made me the saddest. I was distraught when that happened, but we'll get to that. But I really enjoyed when Krupe would add his own little comments to the text because for most of the series, the narrator is using a POV. There's not many scenes where the narrator goes off and they explain something that a character that has a POV isn't directly seeing. Or even if it's like a very uncommon POV, it's still a POV. But every now and again, and this is most prevalent, I think, in Midnight Tides, I think the best example I can think of is at the end of a chapter that I think is about halfway through the book. The narrator goes off in a little vignette, just not, going over the city of Latheris, and then going over to the Azoth, to the dead house, the Azoth dead house, and it talks about how there are Thelem and Toblikai in the ground, which nobody knows, but now we do because of the text. And quick little tangent, I thought that worked great for that book. I think it really built up some expectations and added a little something. I mean, that would have been kind of strange if it came out of nowhere. Not that that would have been bad, but I think that it was good they did that. But Krupe, while necessarily not maybe having expository, even though he does have a lot of expository vignettes where he'll talk about stuff that no other character is really looking at. A lot of it is him commenting on what is happening, having his own thoughts about the events of the story and the tale. In specific, I really liked the moments at the end of the Darajistan chapters where he would basically go over everything that had happened throughout the city and say that this person's doing this now and this person's doing that. And the way that it was presented in the prose, as well as his own little spin on everything, was very enjoyable to read. And it was very much interesting to see how Krupe what he thought about all these events, as well as his opinions on them. Uh, there was one in particular that I remember really enjoying closer to the beginning of the book, where he has a little moment where he talks about Gaz, and and he says something like, "And look at the fingerless man who goes out to kill people every night, so that he does not beat his own wife to death." And I think he has some harsh words for Gaz, which is, only fair. I don't think anybody's arguing Gaz was a good man, but I really enjoyed those. And there was another one in specific where he makes his own comments on the boy Snell, where he says that, this is paraphrasing, of course, but he says something along the lines of, Snell could not feel any remorse for what he did, for he was a boy filled with only hatred in his heart, and that is all he could fathom. And I really enjoyed those little tidbits we get, and it definitely characterized Krupe a lot more for me because I read Gardens of the Moon so many years ago at this point that I don't even remember anything that Krupe does. The most memory I have is some random scene toward, not random, but a scene towards close to the end where Marilia figures out that he's the eel, and I think Krupe just sprinkles some dust in his face and he forgets. And then Marilia remembers at the end, and Krupe says that he's going to tell a tale, very humble indeed, and it all starts, of course, with Krupe, with humble Krupe. And Marilia groans and just says, "Thus spake the eel." Very archaic wording there, but I really enjoyed that, and but I don't really remember a lot about him. And then in Memories of Ice, the only thing I really remember is him standing up to Kaladin Brood, which was definitely a very cool scene. And oh well, I actually do remember him getting whisked away by a woman at some point. I think she was a Barghast woman as well, which was definitely something. Good man, Coupe, good man. But I don't really remember a lot beyond that. So it was really nice to get a little more insight into the rotund man, circumference unending in the faded red waistcoat. Um, I think I just took three different descriptions of Krube that appear on the back of the book, towards the end of the book, and at the beginning of the book, and combined them all. But uh, so I really enjoyed that, and this might be revealing a little too much about myself right now, but when I was reading this for the first time, I realized that Krupe was the narrator at chapter 3. That's when it really clicked for me, which might already be revealing too much about my own inadequacies, realizing this. But I didn't realize that the prologue and the epilogue, I didn't realize that this story was or that the prologue was Croupe regaling this story to Carul and Fisher. Um, I didn't realize that until I read the epilogue. I had assumed for most of the book that because Fisher was in Dargistan, and as was Croupe, that it would turn out that whatever he was telling Croupe and Carul at the beginning of the book would come up later in Toll the Hounds, and that it would be important for the finale possibly. It didn't occur to me until the very end that it was Toll the Hounds that was that story. That we're essentially, this whole story is being told after the fact. This has already happened by the prologue. We don't know how much time has gone by. I will assume not very much, but um, since Fisher is still in Dargistan, but and he does mention in this book that he's just passing through. Um, but I must amend something I've said because of this prologue and epilogue, and that is I've stated before online multiple times that my favorite prologue and epilogue parallels and just in general, my favorite epilogue of the series was from The Bone Hunters, which I still think is very good and probably up there, second place. But I think first has to go to Toll the Hounds because the concept of this being a story told by Croupe as well as the quotes being used in the prologue and the epilogue. I started my video out with one, "Oh frail city where strangers arrive," and the rest. I didn't say that at the beginning, but I really enjoyed the fact that quote in specific. I think is very interesting because I know it's a poem by Fisher Kaltath about Dargistan, which he probably wrote after the fact. And I like that Croupe almost prods and pokes him with it a little bit, saying, making that cheeky little joke at the very beginning. But I really enjoy how the final vignette of the ending of the story in the epilogue is him just going, "Oh, frail city." Um, and this is something that I'll comment on really briefly. I'm probably going to make a video and a post on the subreddit about that poem in specific. But calling Darajistan a frail city at this point, I don't think is an apt description because it survived the Malazan conquest. It has survived all of the events of this story. I don't think that Darajistan's frail at all. Bad things happen to it quite often, but life goes on in the city of Blue Flame. Um, but I do think that it's apt to call it Frail City in this scenario still because of what happened. It makes it seem frail. And I mean, some of the events that happen definitely are heartbreaking, which I think Frail could allude to very well, especially with certain sad things that happen. I feel like sometimes the heart of Darajistan was taken away with certain things that happened, as in like bad things happened that lessened what Darajistan was, with Murillo's death. And I mean, just the idea that the Son of Darkness is no more is truly terrible. But even if he wasn't really a citizen of Darajistan, but the fact that it happened there was also sad. But beyond this, I really enjoyed the ending to this as well. The way that Croupe says, he says, "The tale is spun, spun out, dance by limb, dance by word, witness." And then, thus ends the eighth tale of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. It was definitely a great ending in that scenario. But moving beyond that, oddly enough, even though it was still a very good storyline in this book, the one that probably had, I think, the least amount of oomph in this book, or the one that probably got focused on one of the least, was the plot line with the Malazan um, retired soldiers of the bridge burners, the retired bridge burners, Picker, Ansi, Blue Pearl, Mallet. Well, I guess they got resolved, but Blend, even Duiker didn't really get a lot, but I'll get to Duiker because he was one of my favorite characters in this book. Or maybe not one of my favorite characters in this book, but I really enjoyed the Duiker moments. But they didn't really get a lot, but it still was really great to see them, and I still really enjoyed there was enjoyed them. There was one line, I forget who was the one thinking it during the text. It was either Antsy or Picker or Blend. I actually don't know. It was one of those three, and they're the most prominent, I'd say, out of the Malazan soldiers. And they said something along, or they were thinking something along the lines of, even though they were always family in the bridge burners, their relationship had changed since retiring. They were becoming closer in different ways. Because when they were soldiers, there was always this idea that they could die at any moment. That so you couldn't get so close that your life had no meaning when they died, or possibly. Um, but it was just a different relationship. They were still very close when they were bridge burners. But now that they're in peaceful times, they're retired, they thought that they would have, or their relationship sort of evolved a little bit to change a little more, now becoming citizens of Darajistan. And I really enjoyed that dynamic between them all. Um, I know that a lot of it veered slightly sexual, especially with the arrival of Solara and to their meager group, and that I must say I really enjoyed that scene during the Fiete where they're all sitting about in an outside establishment, and they're just sending drinks back and forth, almost in a flirtatious way, and the waitress eventually is like, I see what you guys are doing. This is disgusting. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm getting you your drink. I'm getting them their drink. And then I'm telling the manager you're not allowed back here after this. Um, which also adds life to the city and it adds life to these characters. And speaking of adding life to the city, this whole book taking place during the Getaron Fiete, I think, was perfect, especially with the way that Gardens of the Moon ends with the Fiete, or Fete, or Fite. I think it's Fiete, based off of. I don't know how it's really pronounced, but I've always pronounced it that way because of the little um, apostrophe that goes above the E. I think it's called an umlaut. No, an umlaut's when you'd have two dots above it. It's in German. But I really enjoyed how lively the city felt. I have always come to the conclusion. I've always thought that if you're good enough at doing it, or if a writer is good enough at doing it, then a location can feel like its own character. You can really make it feel alive, and like its own entity, because it is. And but not everyone can do that characterization super well. There are a lot of fantasy these days where a fantasy city just feels like a superstructure marvel of engineering and whatnot that might have some mystical traps laid about. Um, but Darajistan feels so much more than that because of the way that uh, Stephen Erickson describes it in these books. And I'm sure Ian C. Elsamont does the same thing if Dargistan appears in any of his books. I want to skip ahead like 10 seconds. This may be spoilers for a novel of the Malazan Empire book, but I think it is stated that Dargistan, or I think I know that Dargistan appears in Orb Scepter Throne. But spoilers over. But beyond that, um, I believe that Darajistan feels the most unique out of any location in especially on Getabacchus, because even though a lot of Getabacchus, I know that Getabacchus isn't just the roving plains, but a lot of this book in the Black Coral and Planewalker uh, chapters really just feels like open grasslands with the occasional copse about, maybe a hill or two. Even though I know it's more than that, but a lot of those chapters are just people walking the traders' paths along like the Lamatath plains or the Cinnamon Wastes or the Rivi Plain, which there is no problem with. I think that the world building was really good for those areas, especially since um, I feel like if a lot of authors tried to do that, it would just feel like a barren wasteland. Uh, but that is not what Ganabakis feels like. But Darajistan is probably, it feels so unique, and I really enjoy that. And the Get Around Fiede really helped to push that forward. Just the idea of all these people doing revelries in the streets, getting drunk, getting into friendly fights on occasion, and then every now and again behind bars getting unfriendly fights with mans that have no fingers, with people with no fingers. But we'll get to Gaz. But I really enjoyed that. But with Gaz, since I just said that, we'll segue into Gaz's plotline. It was really interesting the way that Gaz's whole um, ideas about the world were. I remember that there was one chapter where it was talking about Gaz and Thordy, his wife, and Thordy starts doing something strange, which is where she's putting the stones in her garden, overlaying good soil. And Gaz thinks to him that makes him angry because he thinks to himself that's not normal, that's not what's supposed to happen, and it makes him so dissatisfied that he's so filled with rage from this small little thing that he wants to go out and kill somebody. And that was just really interesting to read, to get into his mind with the writing of how easily set off this man was. I mean, all his wife did was place down a couple stones, and it made him murderous. I know that his life is unsatisfactory in other ways that contributed to it, especially with him, missing all of his fingers from that fishing incident. It's still terrible to that this individual has gotten to that point. That's the kind of man Gaz is, that he wants to kill people just for these simple reasons. Um, but it was really interesting to get his perspective on things, especially since most of the killing that happens and the murdering that happens in the Malazan Book of the Fallen is for soldiering reasons. It is impersonal a lot of the time. It is more of, we are soldiers. This is our job. I mean, that is how the world is. People fight, and they're professional about it a lot of the time. But then you get Gaz, who's just a normal guy who just wants to go out and kill other citizens, which is just terrible. Um, the imagery of people being so marred by the strange marks left by his fingerless knuckles, is really disturbing and interesting. I had a very hard time picturing it. I almost imagined it like if a great white shark bit you, but it had no teeth, but it still bit you with that amount of force. So it's like the gums are hard and they just left like strange ridge marks along you. Um, I still can't believe that he had enough strength that he one shot Chardon Lim, literally just going and he was dead. That was insane, I must say. Um, but I just knocked that over. But I really enjoyed Gaz's chapters, and I really enjoyed the parallels that could be drawn between him and Snell, or between Snell and him, I think would be a better way to put it, because, or it goes both ways. But I really enjoyed. I drew connections anyway because Snell to me is what Gaz was when he was a kid, or what Snell is and what he could have been would have evolved into what Gaz was. And Snell might be even more sadistic than that because I don't think that Snell would have the capacity to even have a wife and then restrain himself from attacking her. Uh, Obviously, we'll never know. I don't think Snell will ever come back, but sadly, because he is my favorite character in the book. But Snell really was uh sad to read almost, and I also really enjoyed Croupe's descriptions of him. Like I said earlier, a boy who knew only hatred because that was all that he was. To me, it seems very psychopathic, sociopathic. I forget which it would be, but like no positive emotions, no empathy, no remorse. All he feels is a reward factor for himself. What's going to benefit Snell? To the point where he doesn't even care about his own parents. He doesn't care about his own sisters. He doesn't care about his adopted brother. He doesn't care about anybody. And even when he's caught and he thinks that he's going to be hurt, all he can think about is himself. And he cries and he cries. And it's not out of remorse for what he's done or regret for what he's done. It's just, damn, I've been caught. And it's unfair, he thinks to himself. He's tries to worm his way out of it. He's like, oh, I didn't do anything. He lies, and then he tries to pull authority cards with people that he doesn't even like. He's like, "You can't do this. My mom and dad are going to be mad." And then what's Gruntle going to do? I forget if he said that thing about Gruntle, but he's like, "What is my mom and dad going to do?" And his chapters were really interesting. I will get more into Harlow and his family and Stani Monachus towards the end because, in my opinion, Harlow's story was to me the perfect encapsulation of what Toll the Hounds was, along with Animander Rake. So I will get to them, but I will go into Hutter now with Chalice de Arle, and Hutter's reunion in Dargistan was not at all what I thought it was going to be, and how could it have been? How could it have been any normal reunion? Oh, I mean, he was happy to see them all, and I think they were happy to see him, maybe distraught at the fact that he was now so versed in the ways of assassination, as Ralaknam told him not to do. But it was truly just terrible to see when he got back that nothing was the same. He couldn't acclimate to this. Um, I made a post on the Malazan subreddit where I said that Darajistan was too much the stomping grounds of Crocus Younghand. It is not Cutter's city anymore, which was terrible to see. I really enjoyed the reunions at first when everybody's happy, but then Murillo's dies and it breaks Cutter even worse. And I really enjoyed Cutter's struggles throughout this book that really stem with that were very obvious in the last book or in the 2 books ago in the Bone Hunters with Solara, and then also really well shown with Chalice de Arle in this book, or Chalice Viticas in this book. Um, in his romantic life and where he thinks his life is going to go and what life is. And to me, it was honestly one of the hardest things to read, but also very enjoyable because I was distraught for Cutter. And I mean, ever since the end of House of Chains, all I've thought to myself is, I wish he could get back to Apsalar, or Apsalar could get back to him. And genuinely, during this book, she wasn't listed in the Dramatis Personae. I thought that she might appear in Dargistan because she is because she finished her final assassination at the end of the Bone Hunters with Pearl. Not the Pearl that's in this book for sure, but the Ghislaine demon. But um, it was just sad. His whole story, especially to see how it also degraded Chalice as well. It was sad to see Chalice degrade, going from that young innocent girl getting raised up, kind of not by herself, out of like it was almost enforced, and then she really is just sort of bound by her husband. It's sort of they have a discussion about it at one point that was very interesting, where Cutter basically said that the nobles have everything and they can do whatever they want. And even though he wasn't saying that their lives were necessarily easier or less complex or complicated, he was arguing that they had less room to complain and Chalice had more options than the average person did. And Chalice retorted basically saying that it's not so simple for her in her situation. And it was really interesting because we get the perspective from both sides. We get to see Cutter's perspective. He's been the thief on the road. He's been relatively poor, even though Uncle Mamet had all that money. He kind of chose to do what he did. But um, I'm surprised I even remembered Mamet's name. It's been so long. But it was interesting to see that perspective on it. And then we get to Chalice's, and from her perspective, there really is nothing she can do. Gorlas has complete control of her. She cannot run away. She can act promiscuous, but that could end badly for any number of people. Her reputation could go down the drain. She could lose everything. And she really feels cornered and trapped by all these people in her life. She has all sorts of people trying to control her. Um, and it's all sort of begins with that first tryst with Chardon Lynn. How she makes the decision where she's like, if my husband wants me to do it, I will, but not for the reasons that he wants. I'm going to do it for me. and she slowly starts evolving into into a very lustful, very gluttonous creature with that sort of part of her life. But you also have to, I believe that you can also try and empathize with it, or that there is the incentive to empathize with both sides of this story. Because you got to think, Chalice has been bred for this her entire life. She is a noblewoman. This is sort of the games that the nobles play with one another, and feels powerless before it because this is how it is. She has no choice. But Cutter says that he'll run away with her. He gives her that choice that she can leave. But it's not so simple for her. She, it's almost there. It's, I don't know if this is a saying that really goes around a lot, but it's almost like the idea you put a flea in a jar and it'll only jump as high as the lid, even if they're out of the jar, even if the lid's not on it. And I sort of get that feeling with Chalice in this moment. This is all she knows. She can't do anything else. She can't run away. Also, there is the fear that Gorlas Vidikas could always find her. I mean, it depends on how far away they want to travel. If they stay on Genabakis, the odds of them escaping are slim. And to brave the seas, I mean, that's probably an impossible concept for her at this point. For Cutter, it was not so. Maybe at the time, at the beginning of, or the end of Gardens of the Moon, it was, but at this point, it's a simple affair. I mean, he's already been to 7 cities and back, um, which is all sad in its own right. And I believe that the culmination of Chalice's story at the end, where she goes up to her tower top of her estate, of the Vidikas estate, and she is looking at the moon charm that encapsulated all her innocence, all the years that had gone swept by, and she starts thinking about the dust of dreams, which I can only imagine, or I'll get to that in a second, but she starts thinking about the dust of her dreams and of everything in her life, and she questions all of it and how quickly it could all feel free and for all of it to just be let go. And it was truly, in my opinion, sad when she decided to jump off the roof, and on my subreddit post about this book, I also wrote, I said it was extraordinarily sad to see the dust of her dreams blow away as she hit the floor, um, and her moon bracelet break. And I'm almost happy that Cutter never got to see it, that Crocus never got to see it. Um, but moving on to his story. I mean, the sadness with Murillo and him going to kill Gorlas Vidikas. I was happy that Gorlas Vidikas died, and there was a lot of irony in that as well, to do with his character and the concept. Because throughout this entire story, Gorlas Vidikas has been of this very pompous and greedy mind, where he's the most important person in Darajistan. And he's going to become the highest ranking person. He's going to have the most wealth. He's going to duel as much as he wants. He's going to kill people he doesn't like. He's going to. He almost has this Letheri kind of ideology at the end, where he wants to essentially. He's giving loans or extensions to his mason, to his foremason or his foreman. I mean, at his mining camp, and he thinks about it, about how he's bleeding this guy dry, how this is not fair in the slightest, but you know, he's a stupid commoner. I mean, what, he doesn't know any better, and even if he did, I'd just kill him. He sort of has that attitude about it, which is definitely in my opinion, when I read it, I was thinking, I was like, dang, are we sure this guy's not from Letheris? That's what I was thinking the whole time, but it really was terrible. And I really liked how that got flipped on its head. How in Gorlas's mind, the commonry just flowed and moved, the people's faces blurred all together. It just went by. And then when he dies, the foreman thinks to himself, oh, another new noble's going to take over. Oh, well, just another shift in rotation. And it shows kind of that even though society's built up all of these positions and has sort of created this system, that human lives and living and dying are all still the same. You don't know when it's going to happen. Maybe your odds are improved because you're a noble person, but maybe they're not in Dargistan specifically. But I really liked. I thought it was interesting how that got really flipped on its head. Gorlas's ideas with Cutter killing him instantly, and I also like how roundabout that entire fight went because it was very much a parallel opposite of what happened in Marillia. Because with what happened with Murillo is that he just wanted a duel to injure, and then it happens, and then Gorlas basically is just like, oh well, my foreman saw it, and he didn't. He said it was a duel to the death. That's what we agreed upon, and the foreman's like, yeah, no, that's what I heard because it's his boss. He could get some money out of it, and that was definitely sad to see at the time. But then it gets completely turned around when it's Putter's position because Hutter barely waits for anything to happen. Gorlas like offhandedly says something just as he did before, and he was probably going to make it out like, "Oh, it was a duel to the death the whole time." And Cutter just two daggers straight into his chest, and that was the end of it. And I was happy to see Gorlas Vidikas go. I don't think he was he wasn't a good person. It was sad, I think, to see Chalice die. Um, Although she definitely was becoming not a good person by the end as well, I think, with her ideas of betraying Crocus. Sorry, I just read The Black Company. I have a copy of it sitting right here with me as well. So, um, but I was sad to see that, and it was really a degradation of her character, and it was. I also believe in evolution for Putter again, especially with his final lines with Karsa Orlong. It was the strangest meeting in the series by far. I never would have expected these two characters to see each other, even though they've been on the same continent more than once, in relatively close proximity. Um, but his words to him are essentially, if you were something once, then you can be it again. Crocus was a thief once, so he must be one again. Maybe not to steal any gold this time, it's to steal a hound's life, but uh, to each their own. Um, but uh, very little to say on Murillo's story since I want to get moving with this. But it was sad to see Murillo go, and I really like that character evolution where Murillo really was a good person. I mean, what he's doing at the end, you could argue that what he was doing was more along the lines of a oh he loves Stani Monakis as he did, all of these women. He's a real player. Um, but I feel like it was different in this situation, especially since it wasn't intentional what he was doing. He just wanted to be in a dueling school. And then he realized all this stuff with Stani Monakis, and it was truly heartbreaking to see what happened with her, with Harlow. But I was very sad to see Murillo die. It was a fitting end, but it was a sad end. And honestly, sometimes I feel like this is the Reaper's Gale of the series. But so going beyond that, switching over, Niminder's group in the Black, or we'll whisk far, far away to the south to the Lematath Plains near Bastion and Black Coral and the Cinnamon Wastes. There is Niminder and group. And I must say, with Niminder and group, they were probably some of the most interesting characters towards the latter half of this book. Because towards the start of this book, they were definitely interesting and I was enjoying a lot of it, but by the time they got to Bastion, sort of the ideas with these characters started to really gain momentum and they started moving forward. And what I mean by that is mostly with Niminder and his competency issues and the idea of leadership with him. Um, Throughout that, his whole story arc is that he's the leader of this group, but he doesn't really view himself as a leader. He does not think that he is very effective at everything that he does. And that was interesting because of the way that the group still followed him. I liked reading in his own mind where he's struggling with the idea of, is he worthy to lead these people? Is he skilled enough? Does he have the leadership skills? And it was really brought to a head when Clip was incapacitated and he really had to lead the group again. And he directs them. He says, "We are going to Bastion." And some people have this idea where they're like, "Oh, maybe we should just ditch him." And he goes, "No, we are going to Bastion together." and he sort of takes that forefront. And I especially enjoyed how he has these inner monologues that fade. And throughout a lot of the book, I thought that it was going to go to a darker place and that Nimender was going to lose his way and maybe become the antithesis of what he once was. Or maybe he would become the opposite of what the group needed. Or potentially he was going to become antagonistic towards the group. Because a lot of what there's one particular instance where Fade said something along the lines of, one of them is going to usurp you. One of them, they don't want to follow you anymore. Someone else thinks they could do a better job than you. And it wasn't Clip, even though he was struggling with the idea of Clip being their leader for a little while. It was, I think, Nananda, they said, or Nananda, forget what his name is, but I remember he was slightly confrontational throughout this book. But Fade presents this idea to him. And the reason that I was so worried for Nimender in this instance is because I don't believe it was literally Fade. I believe that's an inner monologuing from him himself, his own darkest thoughts that would mirror those of Fade. And it was really troubling to me for a while because I thought that Nimender was going to turn out, I thought it was going to be a sad ending for me, not the one that I wanted. Um, I'm very glad that that did not happen. And I really enjoy how this whole there's this real juxtaposition that I think is of direct parallel to something happening in Black Coral with Animander Rake that I'll get to. But with the Nimender plotline, with Nimender and his group, it is sort of the situation where we get a lot of Nimender and very little of the rest of the group, from their perspectives anyway. Whereas with Animander Rake and the people of Black Coral, Animander Rake's kept at a great distance, but everything we get about him is from the other people. A lot about him from other people, very little about himself from himself. Whereas with Nimender, it's the exact opposite. But when you do, we switch over and we get the perspective of Skintick and Desra and Aranatha. It's very interesting. And I think specifically with Desra. And the reason I say this, the reason I said it was a juxtaposition, or it is a juxtaposition in my opinion, is because Nimender has all these self-confidence issues about how he can be a leader, about how he isn't a leader, about how he's not worthy to lead this group, about how can he lead this group. But then we move over to Desra, who throughout this book has had some very nasty comments sent her way about how she's a whore, about how she's power hungry, about how she's a survivalist over everything. And they mention that she's just or that she's spreading her legs for Clip because Clip's the strongest among them, and that's how she's going to survive in this world. And then towards Bastion, she starts thinking to herself about all these concepts about how she's really the strongest, is what she thinks to herself, and she'll cling to anybody to survive. Uh, any good leader, anybody who can do it. And then she looks down at the unconscious Clip, I believe, and she thinks, no, not him, but there is Nimender. And she thinks to herself, Nimender is the strongest among us, of leadership, of all these ideas. And I really enjoyed that the way that that was told, with the competency issues and how it's from other people that we understand that Nimender is a good leader. And I mean, you could piece it together yourself seeing the decisions he makes. Whenever there is a decision to make, he's very decisive. There are very few moments throughout the book where I feel like Nimender was going, whoa, 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 hold on, I need some time to think about this. He was quick-witted throughout the whole book, I felt. And I really enjoyed that. Maybe he didn't always make the right choices, but for the best choices. But throughout this book, I felt like he did a very, very good job leading this group. I mean, there was only one casualty among them, and that was Kedivus, as sad as that was. And this all comes to a head with the Dying God, but I'll get to him in a second. But speaking more on those parallels with the Son of Darkness, Animandaris, Animander Rake, and his group, with Animander Rake, even though this is the most we see of him throughout this book, he's still kept at a great distance from the reader. We don't really get a lot of scenes with him, actually. I think that before, like, the real climactic finale of this book, there might be even just maybe a dozen scenes with Animander Rake. Which is very interesting considering how he's been built up. But that's the thing, he's a character that is built up by other people, by Endasilon's memories of him, by Spinonk Durab's memories of him, by Endasilon and Spinonk Durab's actions, about what they do for him, about what they sacrifice for him. Animander Rake is such an individual, such a individual worth of respect and worthy of being followed, that Spinok Durab and Endasilon feel that they need to put aside their own troubles, their own woes, and their own hardships in order to do what they can for Animander Rake. And there are multiple instances throughout this book where characters question this, such as Calor, where he's like, "Well, I don't understand why you would do all of this." And um, there's a scene at the end where Calor does this, has this little confrontation with Spinok Durab, and Spinok Durab just sort of smiles at him, and he says, "You could never understand." And then I believe Spinok Durab says something to the High Priestess or a Great Raven, or Caldon Brood possibly, where he says something along the lines of, "It was an equal exchange. For everything we gave him, he gave us back. We serve the one who serves us." And I think that was especially true towards the end of this book with Animander Rake's sacrifice. Now I'll be a little flippant here, or not flippant, but I'll go into maybe the less analytical aspect, the more epic part of this. That final fight where the Lord of Death himself, the Lord of Death himself, not an avatar, not a fraction of him, the Lord of Death himself appears and walks the streets of Darajistan. And the Son of Darkness approaches, the man who wields the legendary sword Dragnipur, the man who's lived hundreds of thousands of years. The Son of Darkness, a soul taken, lover Solana with blood of Tiam in him, uh, who wields the legendary sword Dragnipuric, who's killed other ascendants, who himself is an ascendant. He's the son of an elder goddess. And he has come to Darajistan as the hounds are bellowing in the distance, or baying in the distance for their toll. His fight with Dasim Ultor or Decembre was legendary. And it went by in a blur for me. I can barely remember it. And the fact that it ends in a sacrifice where he purposefully blocks something with a T shaped cross with his own sword so that it gets jammed into his own skull was terrible. And I mean, it was epic and it was just terrible. And I mean, I was so saddened when he fell over, blood spurting, and it said, Animander Rake is dead. And I could feel the weight of that. And the next scenes that happen in Dragnipur, where this whole idea comes about, where he stands before a world of his own creation, a world that was created by the many choices of his life. And he looks upon it. He looks upon the chaos that was just fought back with this plan that he had planned. He looks upon all of the dead that he has killed, that he has made suffer for hundreds of thousands of years. He looks upon all of this, and then he seeks forgiveness from them. And he seeks to right his wrongs, quote unquote. Or not quote unquote, but that's what I got from it. And especially with the scene where Krupe's own prose speaks in a little bit, where he thinks upon Draconus, the creator of Dragonverse, and he thinks to himself, or Krupe says that that was more complex, the crime so intricate and complicated that there was no point in prizing loose any single detail of it. Was interesting, and this was a forgiveness that did not need to be asked, but one that was shown. And it was truly heartbreaking at the end when Draconus himself wishes to ask for all. It says that he doesn't need to ask forgiveness, that he has done more than enough. Animander Rake is a great man. And yet Animander Rake may never know that that's what Draconus said. As he lifts his hands forward and he does what he has been wanting to do, he sacrifices himself. His people have been lost. They have been without a home for so long. He has been trying his hardest to give them purpose in this world, and it has just been nigh impossible. And at the end, he finally figures out the way to do it, and he gives himself to Corald Galen. And Mother Dark is finally able to turn back because of this, and she thinks about the choices that Animander Rake made to allow this to happen. And she just thinks, oh, Animander, my son. And then she says, I accept. it was truly heartbreaking and very poetic and beautiful to watch as the son of darkness was no more. How his very being was scattered into Crawled Ghislaine, now morphed into it to heal the Warren, to aid in it. It was truly depressing to read at the time, but it was also beautiful and a very fitting end, I think, for this long legacy. I was very It was very sad afterward too. I mean, see Dassam Ultor's reaction. He did not want to kill Animander Rake. He was so distraught by the fact that he had killed him with a sword named Vengeance, with a sword named Grief, his own brother's sword, Andaris' sword. That Dassam Ultor could do nothing, not but weep at this moment. And I think that final scene where Kaladin Brood puts Animander Rake's body into the cart and he says that this will be for him and him alone, and he says it'll be Animander Rake and Kaladin Brood one last time. And I feel like this is one of those moments where having prior knowledge of the origins of this series really helps. Because knowing that this was a D&D campaign, or a GURPS campaign, where Animander Rake and Kaladin Brood were characters that Steven Erikson himself played, and to have I don't know if this specifically was played out, but even if it wasn't, for him to have that character, I felt like it really bled through in these lines. It'll be Kaladin Brood and Andamander Rake one last time. I can't say for certain, but for me, it felt like this could be a very personal thing. And I know this whole book is very personal, was a very personal writing for Steven Erikson. I believe I've heard that before. But it really was a fantastic ending for Animander Rake, and I almost wanted to shed tears when this final line happened as the morning bells tolled, and I felt like it was also very fitting for another storyline that I'll get into now, which is Calor's. And throughout this book, it's I mean. At first, I was reading the Calor chapters, and I was very interested because I'm like, "Oh, finally, we're getting to see more about the High King. This is what I've always wanted." And after reading 3 pages of Calor, my brain slowed down mid sentence and I was like, wait a minute. I'm not happy to see this guy. He's the one who killed Whiskey Jack at the end at Black Coral. And then I was kind of pissed. I was a little mad because I wanted to read more about him, but I was mad at the character. I don't like Calor in this instance. But I was interested in reading about him because he's lived a very long life just like everybody else. He's dealt with elder gods. He's burned continents to the ground. And I believe it's implied in Midnight Tides as well as through uh what is it? Memories of Ice. I completely lost the name there. I think it's implied in those 2 books that the crippled god was called down in order to break apart Kalor's empire. That is why the crippled god has even been pulled down. And I mean, a lot of this series is about the crippled god. Even this book has something about it, even though he's not particularly prevalent in this one. Um, and obviously, I mean, that's where the series is heading, I believe, with the final book being called The Crippled God. Um, but it was definitely interesting to read about him. And I really like how he's brought across as this very jaded, very disgruntled, calculating, pragmatic individual. But then we get glimpses of what Calor was or is underneath all those layers and years, which is very interesting. I believe it really shone through in that first scene with Tulash Shorn after he finally escapes Hood's realm. Uh, and he goes and he finds Calor and he tells Calor a story about the Jag Hut and how at one point in time, even though they're extinct now and how they were very solitary for most of their existence, at one point they had all banded together, millions strong, in order to fight against death itself. And this concept alone, um, I might not be able to accurately describe why it made Calor do what he did, but Calor began to weep, to cry silent tears, and he thought to himself, I owe Gothos an apology next time I see him. Which added a lot of character to the High King, because at this point, I mean, only emotions he seemed to show were calculated murderous intent and um derisiveness about everybody else, contempt almost for the world at large. But to see this was very interesting, especially this is definitely brought to a head when he gets to Dargistan and he fights against Spinok Durav. And he starts voicing these questions. He doesn't want to kill Spinok Durav. He doesn't even want to fight him. He says, I don't even understand why you're doing this for that man. He says he respects you. He respects him and Endus Silon, I believe. He says he doesn't understand why they follow Animander Rage. And it was very tragic almost, where Spinok basically says, I have no choice. This is, or you'll never understand. And he goes to fight him. And he fights the High King for an entire night, which, as we understand, is an extremely impressive feat, because the High King has been alive for hundreds of thousands, or hundred plus thousand years, and is very adept with the longsword, or his bastard sword. Um, so that's interesting. And I really enjoyed, they have this little discussion about Whiskey Jack, and Haller almost, he finally lets loose some of his real thoughts and emotions, where he starts to scream at him, and he says, do you think I want to kill good men? Do you think I revel in this? Do you think I wanted to kill Whiskey Jack? He says, no, I regret having to kill him. I didn't want to do that. He left me no choice. And he basically says that Silver Fox needed to die. It wasn't supposed to be him. I told everybody that child was dangerous. She needed to go. But no one listened to me, so I had to take matters into my own hands. And I believe that also shows what he believes to be his own wisdom. He's 100,000 plus years old. You think he would have picked up a knack for thinking what is and isn't a good and bad idea. But at the same time, you have to view it from how Calor kind of is presented to us, and my own opinions on him, which is that he is a character who never learns. He's lived 100,000 years, and he still seems to be the same old person he was when those three elder gods cursed him. So he's very tragic in that situation, but he's also, you could argue, very evil. I feel like both are very valid for Calor. But I was definitely happy that he was in this book, because I really enjoyed reading his sections. And I think that there's only two more things to talk about. One of them being Hood, because that was definitely not something I was expecting with Hood. Three more things. With Hood, I really enjoy how the God of Death in this world has a lot of character to him in the few moments that we see him. I had already assumed that Hood was generally possibly a good individual because of the ending of Reaper's Gale with Beak and Talk, how they got relatively good endings. Because for both of them, I believe they deserved it, especially Beak. You can't tell, I don't think anybody's arguing that Beak didn't deserve to have his happy ending. All right, maybe you could argue that he works for an expansionist empire and he is conquering nations and conquering continents. You could say all that. But I think Beak deserved to have a happy afterlife. I think that it was definitely what he deserved. And Hood earned a lot of respect from me in those scenes. And in this book, when Hood finally appears and we get to that lone guardsman who's finally figuring out who the murderer is, but sadly, he dies, and Hood sees his spirit, and Hood has this own little monologue to himself, or a little discussion, and he basically just thinks to himself, this man should live by the virtue of the fact that he is a good man and the world is better with him in it. And without him, the world is worse. His children will not be as good people. His wife will be distraught. The world is better with this man in it. And so Hood brings him back. And I think Krupe himself even says to take look one and all, for this is a momentous moment. And I really feels like it shows what the god of death really is, which is in this book a fair and kind man, one who does not revel in death, but merely understands that it is the progression of life, that it goes to death. And that was very enjoyable. more on the Darajistan chapters, especially with those smaller moments. I really enjoyed how Krupe added those smaller characters that reappear and maybe aren't spoken about as much. The ox is one of them with his yoke, which was very interesting. I really enjoyed that the ox was spoken about throughout the whole book, and I enjoy the complacency ideas that are with the ox about how the ox lives his life and he doesn't know anything more, and he might have been happier in certain other situations, but he'll never know, and how the person who rides the cart doesn't even mean anything to the ox. He's just supposed to move forward, and that's his life. And he can feel fear just like anything, but that fear subsides just as quickly as the conditioning takes over when he has to drive more people somewhere. During Toll the Hounds towards the end when the hounds finally come and Dargistan's blowing up. Um, but I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the moments with that guard. I thought they were very interesting. Even though he's not a minor character, I don't want to speak too much on him because there wasn't a lot to do with him. But I really enjoyed the Torvald Nom, Scorch and Left parts of the book. They're just funny. I didn't even piece together that Vorkan was the mistress until the end. I thought it was interesting to see some characters from One Eye Cat that were also Segula or Segula. I don't know how that's pronounced. I always say Segula, but that was interesting and funny on its own. Great to see more Torvald Nam. I really wanted Karsa Orlong to see him again, but I didn't. Karsa Orlong's own situation in this story, I mean, it's more just him reinforcing time and time again what it is he's going to do after having done all of these other things. And I'm very interested in that. I don't know if this is the end of his story in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I know that the Witness series is about him, but I don't know if he's going to ever appear in Malazan again, because I'm pretty sure that we're going back to Lether in the next book. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure we're going back to Lether. And he's no longer there. He's in fact one continent. He's back to his first continent. Um, but his moments with Samar Dev and Traveler were very nice. I really enjoyed those. I thought that his whole situation with the Skathandi was very interesting and it really shows what he wants to do. He's tearing down all these institutions that lead to slavery and degradation of people. And I think it's a very interesting development for his character to have come from where he was in House of Change to all the way to now. And I guess you could even argue Dead House Gate since he's in that book, but we don't really know anything about him at that point. So, but that's very. It was an interesting part of this book. I don't think it was the most shining part of this book, but it was interesting. But one final thing, and that is on the Redeemer, Saland, and Sir Doman. Or there's one more thing after this with Harlow. But I'll talk about these three. And the Dying God. Um, I really the ideas were interesting with the Redeemer, and I feel like I'm not maybe old enough or experienced enough or haven't lived. I guess that's old enough. Lived a long enough life and read enough stuff to fully understand what's going on with that. But I did find the ideas interesting about what it means to be redeemed. What is redemption? Who deserves it? What is the point of it? As well as um, the religious side of it, where the whole idea with the Redeemer is if everybody gets redemption just because they follow the Redeemer and they're fine in the afterlife, then what's even the point of the life you live here? You can do whatever you want. You can be the most evil man. I really enjoyed Salen's perspective on it as the book goes on, where the gears in her head start turning, and she's like, "Yeah, if this cult gets bigger and bigger, then we're going to have to standardize it to a religion, and there's going to have to be do's and don'ts. We're going to have to make rules on what you can and can't do." And I mean, you could draw an immediate parallel to that to a lot of religions, probably most notably Christianity in our real world, but I won't touch any of that. But it was very interesting to read with the Redeemer. I don't know how this is probably going in a different vein from how that storyline was supposed to be taken. I don't know how that whole situation metaphysically takes place with Hood and how all dead people go to Hood's realm, except if you're on Lether, versus being with the Redeemer. I don't really get what their idea what that is. Maybe cultists have the idea that the Redeemer being a god, being an ascendant, can just go to Hood and be like, "Hey, can you just give them a good afterlife when they go through the body gate, please and thank you?" Yeah, Thanks, Hood. Um, and I mean, that was interesting on its own, that whole storyline. I really enjoyed Seer Doman's, and especially the recrimination that Seer Doman has about how Seer Doman thinks to himself time and time again that he himself is not worthy of redemption for having been a part of the Panion Domain. About how even though he didn't want to be a part of it, that doesn't absolve him of everything that had occurred. I especially like his ideas with him doing what he did for the Teist Andy, how he basically comes to the conclusion that they are good people and they don't deserve to have themselves stained by having to kill people that want to kill them. And so he does it and does it himself because he's already tainted in that way. I really enjoyed that aspect of Seer Doman's plot, and I must say I almost wanted to weep as well when at the very end he gets to see Itkovian and Ikovian asks him to if he will sit with him and speak with him, and he says yes, and Ikovian sort of shies away and cries because it's been so long since he's had any company. Now Segeda Travos is with him, or Seerdoman. I also like that he is the Seerdoman who was helpful to Talk the Younger. I remember when I read Memories of Ice all those years ago, I had always wondered if that Seerdome would come up. I thought that he had just died during the battle at Black Coral, but apparently not. Quite happy about it because his plot line was very good in this. Um, with the Dying God, I feel like you could draw a lot of parallels with him, with the ideas of Sam and Kellic. I feel like the most immediate that you can draw because it's mentioned to be a nothingness. Kellic is just nothingness. It's just a numbness that spreads throughout you, that takes over when you drink it, too much of it. I will say the horror aspects of that plot line and what happened in Bastion and with those villages was very interesting and very creepy. I'm assuming that's more what happens. Stuff like that is what happens in the Balchlane and Corporal Broach novels. Just that level of creepy and horror. It was done very well, and I really enjoyed those horror aspects of this book. One thing that Malazan does great is having so many different genres pulled into it, even though it's epic fantasy, military fantasy. But beyond this, with the Dying God, I feel like the most easy parallel, or maybe not easy, but to me, the most obvious parallel you could draw with Kellic being advertised as alcohol in the first place is with drug abuse and with alcoholism. About how people do it to numb themselves, people do it to escape, and that's what Kellic was. And I don't think anybody's arguing that Kellic was a good thing, especially with the people who were using it actively, like Gradathon. I'm glad that Monkrat had that change of heart towards the end with Spindle. Um, and I believe that that is very important for the coming book with the Bone Hunters. I'm guessing is where the next book is going to go. But I feel like that was very important because um, they mention frequently that Dasham Ultor told them to do what's right, be good people. And that's what Monkrat and Spindle decide to do. And I feel like that lesson is going to travel very heavily over to the Bone Hunters because they are a Malazan army now, even if they are not connected and the Malazans don't know where they are. Um, but on to what I think was one of the most important and one of the best plot lines is poor Harlow. And at first, I wasn't very interested in this plot line, and I didn't know where it was going in terms of the story. Uh, I will say it's the catalyst for a lot of what happens because it's the reason Murillo dies, partially, um, and I guess that's about it. Murillo dying, but that also leads to Cutter's whole fiasco, where he ends up, leaving Dargistan again, which in itself was sad. But Harlow, the idea that all these people have come for this small boy, I think was very hopeful. Just to help this one innocent young man who was bullied and uh, has been cast into these mines because of it. I thought some of the ideas were very morose and sad with Harlow, of the ideas where, yes, he is an individual who's going to get bullied because he's a kind man, because he's a nice man, because he's smaller than other, or because he's a kind boy, he's a nice boy, he's a young boy, he's a smart boy. And these are qualities that some people don't have, and because they don't have them, they lash out and they get mad at people like this. And because of this, Harlow suffers, which was a very depressing and nihilistic idea throughout this book, I think. But I don't think I used nihilistic quite right there. But to me, it was just a sad. It was just depressing to think about that. That's the way the world is. Um, but I really like how, in the end, just as Malazan I've said is, or I know Malazan has been stated to be all about empathy, and I feel like that's very true in this book as well, considering all these characters who go to help Harlow in his time of need. Considering Murillo, who is um wants to help Stani Monachus, who is distraught because of this, who he believes is on the road to killing herself, just as Chalice did, which would have been terrible. Um, it's all quite sad, but I really enjoyed how Bainisk was a part of this story, and how Harlow, in his kindness, tells him golden lies about the city. How it's a land where everybody's happy, everybody has a manda, and everybody has food to eat. There's bread everywhere. People skip down the roads, and it is clean and it is good, and there are good people there. Which is obviously a lie because people like Snell and Gaz are there, and Gorlas Vidikas and all these people. And it was truly heartbreaking at the end, especially to think what Gorlas wanted to do. Gorlas was going to probably torture that child just because Murillo wanted to do something with him, which is just wanted to save him, which is just. I mean, Gorlas Vidikas deserved the end that he got, and probably worse. I mean, I know that I can only imagine what Hood did with him in the end, but or what afterlife he got. But Harlow and Bainisk finally deciding to leave, and Bainisk sacrificing himself for Harlow, and Harlow cradling his broken face and singing him those sweet lies about the city one last time, broke my heart. I was hoping throughout the entire book that Talon Imas that he had helped was going to help him, only to find out that he got himself eaten by some Azoth soil. Like, what in the world? That made me mad. I must say. I was like, are you kidding me? That little boy helps you. You can help him even a little bit? Come on. I thought that was a good Talana Mass. I thought that character was gonna do something like that. Not saying that they're evil or anything, since I said a good Talana Mass, but I just thought that he in specific was going to help him. And even though I guess not necessarily it's in his, or he doesn't have to do anything. I was expecting him to help, and I was a little sad that he didn't in the end. And he got eaten by his oth soil. I'm assuming that's also going to come up in a different book if there ever is one that deals with Dargistan again. Um, well, Harlow finally escaping and Bellum Nom helping him was very nice. I'm glad that it seems that the Noms in general, all of them seem to have a generally good heart. You could absolutely, I mean, Torvald Nom's a thief. I mean, you could argue he's a criminal, he's not a good man. And then you could also argue on the fact that he has done some heinous things, especially at the beginning of this book when he sleeps with that nobleman's wife, unbeknownst. And then but I mean, Torvald Nam's. I think he has a good heart in general. That Torvald Nam wants to do the best thing. And even though Ralph Nam's an assassin, I feel like he also is in a similar situation. I don't think he even kills anybody throughout this book. But then you move over to Bellum Nam, who is a good man, a good boy. I mean, I honestly I thought it was funny the way he treated Snell, and he even mentions that his uncle's shop isn't a it's not a slave house, it's not a slave trader thing. It's just where some boys go to work. And he was just basically just making Snell scared, which is its own form of torture, but I thought it was well deserved for the things that Snell was doing. Um, and for him to decide to do all this of his own accord, even though Murillo didn't originally want him to, was fantastic, and to show the willpower that this young boy had, especially when he goes and he actually does find Harlow and he brings him back to Stani Monachus at the end. And that final scene where Stani's crying because she finally sees Harlow, and Harlow says something that nobody hears. And their little discussion almost brought me to tears. I think I might have actually shed one, where she says that she just can't remember anything good about that time, which is completely fair. And I feel like it's part of that empathy and how difficult and complex these situations are. Because I don't think it's fair to look at Stani Monachus and say she's a terrible mother for not liking this book. I mean, you could say in general that she's not doing, if you want to say that she's not doing her motherly duties, you could say that. Even though she's giving them money, you could say she's not giving Harlow the love he deserves. But I feel like in this instance, it's where, see, you're also supposed to have that empathy where you have to think about what had happened to her and how absolutely terrible it was, and how every time she looks at Harlow, that's all she can think about. And I mean, this is a concept that also runs along with Seren Padak, even though she doesn't have a child from that situation. Um, Seren Padak almost killed herself because of the same thing. And, but I really enjoyed how Harlow says those words to her, how there was me, I was good. Um, and Stani looks up and she doesn't know how she's going to do it. But she looks at Harlow. And as the text puts it, permitted herself to look at Harlow in a way she never had before. And as Krupe puts it, and that just about did it. And that almost made me want to cry. And the final line really did make me want to cry, which is, and what were those words Harlow spoke? They were this, of course. See, Banus, this is my mother. And that was truly just, I think, the best ending for this book. Um, I don't understand certain things that happen throughout this book with the Hounds of Light. That really made no sense to me. It was epic, and I really enjoyed it. But I don't really understand what they were doing there. My best guess is that it's going to have something to do with the Tice Leosian and Kural Thirlon and Father Light and everything going on there. Because a lot of this series has been about darkness, light, and shadow. Those are a lot of the big things that are going on throughout this series with that pantheon and that mythos of the Malazan world. And it's going to continue in the next books, I'm guessing. I believe the Hounds of Light were there for a reason. I mean, Tice Leosian did appear in House of Chains. Lorik is one. They're the couple that they see in the Nascent, close to the statues, as well as the fact that Osric is in that book, or Osric, or Osiric. Uh, he's got a bajillion names. Um, but he seems to be like the opposite of Animander Rake, whereas Animander Rake's the son of darkness. It seems as if Osric is the son of light. I think it is mentioned that he's the champion of High House Light. So, um, in some of the glossaries in the previous books, I'm hiccuping now because I've been talking so long. But I think that this book has a great epilogue as well. Nimiter ascending to become the new ruler of the Teist Andi, I think is very fitting. I've heard the idea thrown about online that the parallels between him, that he's basically the animated rake of his generation. When you look at him, it tells you about Animander Rake. That's an idea that I've seen thrown around online before, which is very interesting. I don't know too much about that. I didn't draw immediate parallels to that, so I won't speak on that too much. But um, the tale is spun out. Dance by limb, dance by word, witness. I think the fact that it ends with Krupe once more speaking about the "O frail city where strangers arrive" is just very poetic and beautiful, and I think it was a great finale for this book. The themes of this book of compassion and empathy, as well as the ideas of death, about how sudden it is, about how it just comes to people. There's a whole section at one point that where all it deals with is random people throughout Dardistan dying, as well as we get the guardsman who's never named, whose wife is cheating on him, sadly enough, as well as the ox and whatnot. It all speaks to these ideas very well, in my opinion. And for me, Toll the Hounds was an amazing tale of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and it genuinely made me sad to leave Darajistan once more. I cannot wait until hopefully another book takes place here and I get to read it. And I cannot wait for when I reread this book. Maybe a decade from now, maybe less. Maybe I never read another book series again and I only read Malazan for the rest of my life. But well, that's not true. But I really enjoyed this book and it was very good. I'll probably be making more videos about some of the epigraphs in this book and some things that I really enjoy, and I'll probably make a video talking about just the epilogue and the prologue because I did one for the Bone Hunters because I liked that one so much, and I noticed these literary connections I can make. And even though I'm not the most versed in literary analysis and discussion, I still really enjoyed it. So I'll probably make more videos about Toll the Hounds coming soon. And I'm also going to be making more videos about the Black Company. I've already reread the first of them since the last Black Company video I made, or the only one I made. And I think about a quarter of the way through Shadows Linger, the second book in the first Black Company trilogy. And then I also have every Black Company book except for Lies Weeping at this point. So I have that to look forward to. I also bought the Book of the New Sun, so that'll also be very interesting to read. And I have a bookshelf with like 500 books in it that I haven't read already, all fantasy and sci-fi. So I have a lot to read and make videos on. But in recent times, it'll be Malazan and the Black Company. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I thank you for watching. I know it was lengthy this time around, but I feel like such a book as Toll the Hounds deserves that much. So I hope you have a good day, and I hope you enjoyed watching. Goodbye.